right, horror heads, welcome back to another episode of Horror 365. I am your host, the Mouthpiece of the Northeast, Jimmy J, alongside today with the 80s horror god himself, Sean T. And why? Why is Sean on this show? Well, because we love Sean. We want him on every show possible. But aside from that, today's a very special episode. I've been scouring the internet and the streets in search of the man that was behind In Search of Darkness, the journey into 80s horror, and he's finally here right now, Mr. Robin Block. Robin, thank you for joining us today all the way from the UK. How are you, buddy?
I need to record that and play it first thing in the morning, because that was the best introduction I've ever had in my life. Right? I'm so motivated to be the best podcast guest you've ever had now. I'm really pumped.
You know what? A lot of people say, we don't need coffee, we don't need caffeine, we just need Jimmy J.
I'm sold. I'm sold. I'm there.
Kind of like the Rocky theme.
Yeah.
Right. A little motivation. Well, you know what, man? You got to get that pumping, no matter what day it is, especially on Monday mornings. Everybody said, please. I said, listen, I got you covered. I'm up at 5 a.m. Eastern time almost every day, and I don't know where it comes from, Robin, but I think it's genetics.
It's a gift. It's a gift.
Well, it's a gift today to have you here on the show, man. I appreciate it. Like, you have no idea, because I've been watching these documentaries since the first part, and when I first seen it come out, I'm like, oh wow, this is interesting, because for me, I've never seen something like this on 80s horror. And watching them, man, I had a ton of questions going through my mind, but I guess starting from the top here to you, what was it that did it for you? What was it that hooked you on horror?
Do you know, I was talking about this the other day with a friend of mine. When I was growing up, I had a single parent family. I lived with my mum, and my mum really didn't worry too much about the age ratings on videos. So I remember seeing The Thing when I was very, very young. And what we used to do on Saturday nights is we used to go to the video shop and we'd get a horror movie and a pizza. So that was my entry to 80s horror. And I have vivid memories of the first time I watched Nightmare on Elm Street, and Evil Dead, and like all the classics. And you grow up, and when I was in my sort of mid-30s, it was like 80s horror started calling me. I found myself drawn to kind of obscure websites that had all the VHS cover art. And I didn't understand at the time, but that was such a huge signal. And that's kind of where it started. It was realizing that kind of 80s horror was actually a very safe space from an imaginative point of view. And I kind of missed the aesthetic. I missed the experience of committing to a film based on the cover art and what you read on the back, and then you were stuck with it. You had to see it through. And it's so different to how we consume media now, where if something doesn't do it for you straight away, you move on to the next thing because everything's available everywhere. And the same applies to music. And I think what's interesting about 80s horror and also In Search of Darkness is, it's coincided with the kind of massive spike in the rise of vinyl, the massive spike in nostalgia. So there's lots of different things thrown in there, and also these things tend to work on a 30-year cycle. So a lot of the guys and girls who are kind of making movies in the 80s, they were inspired from the 50s. So you get this sort of it's very circular. So that's kind of what started me on 80s horror. Like I remember sitting down in my office and getting a sketch pad out and just writing down the names of who I wanted to be in it, John Carpenter, all of that kind of stuff. And it all started with that kind of manifestation. So that was July 2018. And we fast forward to October 2019, and we're in Hollywood. We're at Beyond Fest. It's a packed 600-seat cinema. There's a queue around the block. And, what I realize now is if I hadn't have come along and set this up, someone else would have done. Because sometimes ideas just want to happen.
Yeah.
They're not that complicated. And this was one of those, very rare times where just everything came together all at once. Like people started reaching out to me as soon as I started doing it, well before we went into crowdfunding.
Wow.
And so it was like that. And here we are, like a few years later, completing this trilogy, and it's 15-hour runtime with the greatest lineup of 80s horror icons ever assembled on screen, with a few of them sadly no longer here. And it's made a dent in the horror universe. I really believe that. They'll be watching In Search of Darkness in 100 years because it covers this decade, which is going to be still relevant in 100 years.
Yeah.
And that's
No,
what's remarkable about the whole process.
I agree with you, and I'm thinking like a point that you brought out before was how like history repeats itself. So I feel like right now for horror, we're in this time period where I feel it's the best time to be a horror fan, and other than the '80s, and because now technology has advanced, so now we're in this whole like, hey, we can do what we did in the '80s, but we can amplify that. Uh, so I think the best is yet to come, honestly. And I think this right here, what you had with this documentary, now you're getting newer horror fans that are just being like introduced into this world, a taste of what it was like to be in the '80s when and Sean, I know you can talk about this because you were a teenager in the '80s. Back in the '80s, dude, I mean, it was frowned upon almost horror, and now it's glorified. It's crazy the transition that occurred, and with this documentary, you said you started in 2018, correct? And
Correct. Yeah.
and you just sat one day, hey, I'm gonna jot some names down and see who I want on the show, and it just started falling into place for you.
Yeah. I mean, we'd just done so the poster, that one, In Search of the Last Action Heroes, that was our first documentary, where we did it under CreatorVC, and we crowdfunded it. So during the production of that, I had enough time to look at something else, and I thought, well, you covered action now, let's do horror. And what was really interesting is I put together like a 90-second little montage of clips, and we put it out on Twitter, and it went viral. Like, just blew up. Like people started emailing me. So many sort of crazy things happen. Like when we did the first Kickstarter, we had a tier where if you paid a certain amount, you could appear in the documentary. And I had a whole bunch of people do it. One of the people that did it was Diana Prince, the
Oh
Darcy,
yeah,
the
Mail Girl, yeah.
yeah, right. And she did it, and then I had this one email that I didn't recognize. So after the Kickstarter, when we started production, I had to email everybody, and I was like, "Who's this email?" So I wrote to the email address, and I said, "Thanks so much for sort of backing us at this level. Could we're about to start filming. Could you tell me who you are and what you do?" And about half an hour later, I got an email back saying, "Hi, my name's Corey Taylor. I'm the lead singer of Slipknot."
Oh, dude.
And it was like, you know, and then we ended up doing 3 kind of collector editions with him, and for his audience. And it's been, no matter what happens next, with what we do, we'll always have this trilogy, and I'm so proud of it. And my great friend David Weiner, who wrote and directed this, um, you know, he he- he's put so much of himself into this film. And I really think it works as a kind of comfort blanket. People have it on in the background, people come in and out of it, and there's things we want to do later this year. We want to offer it out to independent cinemas so they can just run it all day, especially during Halloween season, and make some money for themselves. Like, we don't want a license fee from it. We just want to support kind of indie theaters,
Nice.
because enough horror fans know about it now, so it becomes this sort of massive, because they're super long,
Yeah.
and then you just get sucked in. And what we find is people say that it's like a comfort blanket for 80s horror fans. Like, it's
Yes, yeah.
just, and it doesn't pretend to be cleverer than it is. It's just the way I look at In Search of Darkness is it's just an indulgence.
3 parts, which I was shocked that it was going to be, 3 parts. And the funny thing about it for me was that I could sit here and it's like before I knew it, 3 hours has gone by. I'm like, it's been that long already, Because
When we when I looked at the rough cut for In Search of Darkness 3, which I reckon is the best received, like the backers uh, have been, they've always loved what we've done, but it's been next level with this one, which was interesting to me because we'd covered all the major franchises. We'd covered most of the clever films as well. So this is like the bottom of the horror VHS shelf. This is the kind of level we're at, right? Like one note horror movie.
this is like
But
the old English, right? This is like
yeah,
that old
yeah,
the St.
right.
Ides on the bottom. Yep.
Absolutely. And that was a real challenge. Like, how can you talk about a film that doesn't have that many dimensions? But actually we found a way that that doesn't laugh at these movies. It kind of respects them. Um, but yeah, like when I watched the rough cut for that, I remember thinking I'm supposed to be looking at this in a critical way. After about 10 minutes, I was just curled up in front of the fire, watching watching this and enjoying it as the audience. And I think that's a lot to do with the scripting and editing. But actually, I think it's to do with the format as well. You can cover a lot of ground, and it's very much of its time. I don't know about you guys, but I watch a lot of YouTube creators that cover old movies and introduce me to old movies. And sometimes I don't have the bandwidth or attention span to watch an 80s horror movie. But I like the hit of covering it, the best bits, and talking about it for like 5 or 6 minutes. I like that. And I think that's what In Search of Darkness does pretty well.
I agree. I agree, man. It gives you just a taste of that film. And what I started doing is I watched the first one and then I'm like, I got to start writing some of these movies down. And I get to the second one. Now, when the second In Search of Darkness, I have my notebook and I got a pen and I'm going, oh, what I haven't seen this. I'm gonna write this down. I'm gonna watch this one, you
See,
know?
that was something that we hear a lot, and it wasn't intentional with the first one. But by the second one, we realized that we were introducing our audience to some horror movies that they hadn't watched. So in the packaging for the Blu-ray for the second one, we had a kind of watch list that you could tick off. And with the third one, which is shipping out right now, we've done it again. We've put a kind of watch list in there where people can go and actively tick off all the films. We're going to be developing something called the In Search of Darkness Challenge, which is because we're going to be running a flash sale on March 28th for the remaining stock that we have. And to help promote that, we're going to be developing a kind of free digital PDF with all the films we've covered in the trilogy.
Okay.
And
That sounds
the
cool.
In Search of Darkness Challenge is, only the most hardcore elite horror fan will have seen everything and ticked it off.
Oh, there it is. Sean, you ready?
Oh yeah,
Is your-
I'm sure.
We should
I'm
probably
sure I've
come up
seen
with
quite
some
a bit
sort of
on the list, but
some prize for completing it. But no, it's that was something that wasn't intentional, and then by the time we got to part 2, and certainly by part 3, it's something we think about now. We realize that actually, what we're doing is curation, and the way we did it with part 3 is before we started any production, before we did our first crowdfunding and pre-sales campaign, we went out to our audience and we said, look, what do you want us to put in part 3? And then after that first crowdfunding campaign back in October 2021, all the backers got to vote for what films they wanted us to cover. So what's kind of cool now is if we get criticized on Twitter for saying, oh, you didn't feature this film. And I'm like, that's because our backers didn't vote for it.
Yeah, like you left it up to the backers and the people that supported the film, which I think is cool. It's more interactive. They feel like they have a piece in this.
That's the mission here, with everything that CreatorVC does. It's not, I'm not really interested in being in the TV industry or the film industry at all. I like to call it fandom with purpose. It's community driven entertainment, and the whole experience of backing one of our projects, all the events and the journeys that that we publicize and promote, and it's very inclusive all the way through production. That's part of the entertainment value. What we find is the relationship between the relationship that the backers have with the film that they've co-produced, essentially, that's very unique. You know, when we see our Blu-rays and stuff go up on eBay, you know, they're hundreds of dollars because people don't often get rid of it because their names in it. You know,
Yeah.
it's really a manifestation of their fandom, and that's the kind of work I really like doing, because, you know, in a very simplified way, it allows me and my team to almost work with our audience to develop a brief that they want us to deliver for, you know, and deliver for them. And so it's very insular by design.
And that makes sense, man. It does. And one other thing that ran through my mind is, how did you guys decide on what films you were putting into this? Like, what was that process like?
Well, it's not really that complicated. So with the first one, you know, we looked at what were the most important horror films year by year. You know, we want, and then it also came down to access, like what talent can we access? Actors, behind the scenes, obviously for the filmmakers themselves.
Yeah.
And so it's a combination of who can we feature. So across the trilogy, we have 125 contributors. So this is the greatest lineup of 80s horror icons ever assembled on screen. And so it's meant we've been able to cover so many films, even though that you know, we're very fast. We don't spend a long time on one film. It means that we get enough insights and depth where it feels, you know, like you're touching the film. But there's been, you know, the greatest thing for us is where we get a kind of a contributor that's been in loads of different 80s horror movies, because, you know, that's one interview where we can actually get insights about a whole bunch of films. So that's how we kind of make our decisions. It's partly to do with what are the most relevant films that we can cover, what can we talk about in terms of, you know, how that film thematically links to what was happening in society then and how we reflect back on it now, because part of what our role is to recontextualize 80s horror. You know, I've got a documentary that's in production right now, called Aliens Expanded, and it's
Okay.
looking at James Cameron's Aliens.
Oh,
And so, you know, 20 years ago, there was like so many making of documentaries done about aliens. Like, they're amazing. We can't compete with that. But what we're trying to do is recontextualize that movie. You know, go not scene by scene, but highlight all the most significant scenes and break them down and look at it from the fan's perspective now. So it's a
yeah.
way to kind of further enjoy the film. And I think that's related to In Search of Darkness, because I think what it does, is it allows an audience to enjoy those films again
Yeah, those key moments
in a
too,
new
like you
way.
said. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I don't know about you, but what I like when I watch a retrospective video, especially of a movie that I've seen that's fresh in my mind, I like it when someone explains to me in a way where I didn't see it the first time. You know, like their perspective and the way they're looking at it actually adds to my enjoyment and memory of the experience of watching that film. And that's where that's one of the values that I think that we have with the documentaries we do, is we have that perspective, which in of itself is interesting if you're keyed into it, you know. And it's not too intellectual, it's entertaining.
Yeah. No, and it's just enough. Like I noticed too. It's just enough of each movie that you had there. It's like you're not talking about one particular film for an extensive period of time. It's just, hey, key moments, like you said, you give us just enough to want more and then add it to our watch list, man. I mean, the part three I just completed, it was incredible. I think
I'm
I
really
enjoyed
proud
part
of part.
two.
You know, part three, David Weiner knocked it out of the park, and it was a real challenge because my concern was, you know, like I said, some of these films are not that complex. You know, Pieces, you know, which was done on a, you know, budget of about $15. Like, what can you say? But actually, you can find interesting things to say about these films, in a way that doesn't disrespect the film, but actually, you know, we've got right now, because it's a recent release, we've got podcasts that have sprung up that are just covering films that we've featured. and people are going on social media saying, I've just watched this because of In Search of Darkness 3. And that's like the highest accolade we can get. Like, it's not something, and I'm not sitting here going, oh, we thought this through, and we knew. We didn't. It's always, we go in with humility, but it's always so reassuring when we get that kind of feedback.
Why was it, that you guys put it out as a 3 or 4 hour block instead of like hour-long episodes? Like, what went into that decision?
Honestly, right? Because we can do what we want, right? And what, let me sort of validate that. Because of our model with pre-orders and crowdfunding, all we're focused on is delivering for our backers, right? So if you think about a documentary that's being made for Netflix, it needs to appeal to the widest audience possible. We're the opposite. We want to appeal to the most narrow, deep audience possible. So it's like, well, regular feature time lengths, time doesn't matter to us, honestly. So In Search of Darkness 3 is like over 5 hours long. It's like 5 hours 40 minutes. It's nearly 6 hours, which is insane. And we had to use special Blu-rays. Traditional Blu-rays are normally BD25 discs. We've had to go to BD50. It's a lot more expense, just to make sure that the Blu-ray quality doesn't get too compressed over like 6 hours. But that's because we could, and because we didn't care about external distribution, because that's gravy. But we're focused on our backers, and our backers know our work now to be indulgent, because we're not cheap. I like to think we're reassuringly expensive, but we're really focused on the horror fan that's keyed into what we're delivering. And I always talk about there's a guy called Kevin Kelly, who's a guy that set up Wired magazine, if you know Wired magazine.
Yep.
And he's got this amazing essay called 1000 True Fans, and that's our kind of mission. We want to have 10,000 true fans that will be part of every project we do.
Yeah, because they're
And
more
we're
like,
just delivering for them.
it's like a social media account in a way, right? You look at a social media account, I'd rather have 100 organic follows versus 100,000 bots, robots, or just
Yeah.
people that you don't know, because you're going to get that engagement. You're going to get people that care, and it's not fake follows. It's real. It's organic. So
And also, we know our followers because we have access to them. If you make a film for a TV channel, you don't know who they are, you don't know who's consuming, but we know we have an intimate relationship, or a far more intimate relationship with our backers, because of all the dialogue that happens all the way through making one of these, because they take about a year and a bit to make. And we're moving into 90s. That'll be the next In Search of Darkness.
that's what I'm about to ask you. Are you covering the 90s?
Yeah. So we the next In Search of Darkness, which will begin crowdfunding in October, that's going to be In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994. So we're actually splitting the decade in half, so we can use an extended runtime to actually go deeper. And why I'm excited about 90s is the 80s, generally 80s nostalgia was huge, but now the 90s nostalgia is absolutely huge. I mean, you've got Scream in the cinema this weekend. You've got the 90s are really big, but from a horror perspective, a lot of people think of it as the lost decade of horror. But there's some incredibly interesting films to talk about. And I'm not just talking about the big franchises that everybody knows from the 90s. So the challenge for us is, how do we make In Search of Darkness familiar enough for our existing audience, but also authentically feel like 90s? And that's a really cool challenge, and I'm super excited.
When is that? Did you guys start that process already? Or
No. We will begin crowdfunding in October, and we expect it will be delivered either Q4 2024
okay,
or Q2 2025. So it takes, especially with a new decade, it's going to take a long time to
long
sort of.
time, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
one of my suggestions, which you probably already are thinking about, people under the stairs.
Yeah.
People-
Like,
yeah,
but especially with, this is why we split the decade up, because there's so much, you know, great movies that haven't been covered because obviously we've been stuck in the 80s. But there's so much other stuff in the 90s that I never even knew about, that we all want to take. We want to go on a journey with all our backers and, like, you know, go back in time to the 90s and, you know, go treasure hunting.
Switching, I guess, back to the 80s and In Search of Darkness 3 from the 80s, and every movie that you had to sift through and put on the documentary, was there any like kills for you as a fan that you put up in your top three, or what was your favorite kill from the 80s horror?
That's a really hard. I mean, you know, no one's ever asked me that. If I've got a favorite kill, I know what my favorite kill is, right? And it's not because it's particularly clever, but it's the only one that I've gone back and freeze framed.
Okay.
Back when I had a wired remote control to my VHS, you know, and you could do the frame grab
Oh
thing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So it's the end of Nightmare on Elm Street where the mum gets sucked through the door. That's actually probably my favorite kill.
And you stopped it because that
You can see
whole
the
ending,
dummy, yeah,
the dummy is right there.
yeah.
Yeah. Which is like, man, for a film like that, and especially how big that franchise became, and then you know, you go back and wait a minute,
Do you know,
it's comical.
I went to, at the end of last year, they had a screening of Nightmare on Elm Street in London, and I went to see it with a couple of friends, and it was I hadn't seen it in years, right? And I was so impressed with it as a film. And you forgive, you know, the few effects that kind of look a bit hokey, but it was still like magnificent. And we're in this cinema, and just the vibe of watching Nightmare on Elm Street with a real audience. And we've all seen it a million times. We all knew all the dialogue, but it was just so cool. And like, I love it when you have a movie experience like that, where it's like seeing an old friend. You know, that's what I love about 80s horror. That's, you know, because we all have relationships with those films.
Yeah. Oh, Sean, what was your, you know, favorite? I mean, I don't even know if I can ask you this question, but I guess favorite or top three 80s horror films.
You can't ask me that question. They would change daily. Prowler's up there.
That was
Maniac.
covered. I think Maniac was covered in part one, I believe, and then Prowler was in part three. Yep. And what's the third?
Uh, Let me go with something I feel that we just shared on the page. Something I find very underrated is Madman. Is one of my super favorites. I don't know. I don't know which has that one been covered in Search of Darkness or no?
Well, Madman, that
Yeah,
one.
Madman, 1981.
I think it has. Do you know what? It's all a blur. I can't
Yes.
tell you. I was like, yeah, we've covered that in part two. I can't remember. You know, I read somewhere that there was 683 horror movies made in the 80s. I don't know if that's a true statistic.
I've seen different lists. I try to find a comprehensive list, but you know, it like you just said it, and I try to find lists that you know, strictly state to horror, because a lot of the list will venture into the sci-fi area, and I'm not really into the sci-fi. I just want the straight horror. And you know, because I think some of the sci-fi stuff they just label it as sci-fi horror because there might be some blood
Yeah.
or something like that involved.
Yeah.
You know, like to me, like you were speaking about Alien earlier, I don't really consider Alien horror. I consider that sci-fi.
Yeah,
Just,
me too. I
just
mean,
my
that's why we
opinion.
didn't feature it.
Yeah,
We got criticised for not featuring it. It's a hot debate. So we
yeah.
featured The Thing in Search of Darkness, right? Which is actually one of my favourite horror movies of all time. But we're doing, like, the sci-fi documentary we did In Search of Tomorrow. It's very likely that in the sequel, which is In Search of Tomorrow Part 2, we're going to cover The Thing. And even though we've covered it in part one, we're going to explore it in a different way, in more of a scientific way,
Mhm.
rather than a horror way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that fine line. You know,
And
And
just to
also,
still
it's kind of a silly argument, isn't it? You see people in the comments really going at it. Like, you know, this isn't sci-fi, it's fantasy. And I'm like, it's sci-fi if we want it to be sci-fi. Has it got a rocket ship in? Yep, it's sci-fi. You know,
But just to
has it
speak to
got
what
an
you said
alien in it?
about seeing Nightmare on Elm Street in the theater, you know, there's a company here in the States that does the same thing. They throw
Is
the
it
old films in
Fathom?
the theater, and unfortunately, like you said, I like to, you know, I've seen the movie how many countless times. We just saw My Bloody Valentine in the theater, my son and I. We saw The Thing last year. We saw The Lost Boys. You know, the list goes on and on. And it's just a shame that that theater isn't packed for that with the popularity of 80s horror, because again, it's a whole different vibe when you're sitting. You know, I don't like to be in big crowds, but people say to me, "Well, why do you go to concerts?" Because the concert's about a vibe. Being in the theater is about a vibe. Everyone is on the same vibe and wavelength, so
Love it.
you know, it creates that experience. You know, but seeing My
Sean,
Bloody
that's a great way to
Valentine
describe
on
it.
Valentine's Day in the theater
Yeah.
this past year was just amazing.
The two films I've seen last year were The Thing in the cinema and Nightmare on Elm Street, and both were just. It wasn't just about the movie. It was
Hmm.
about time travel. You know, in that
Absolutely.
theater at that point, I was watching it for the first time, and it was 82. You know, like it's sort of like that's and it. Yeah, there's and it's funny as well with those really clever notable iconic movies. They have to have complexity and depth and a lot of things going on. That's why they're still relevant now, right? But the way I like to look at movies is they become friends with us, and it's like you're not the same person. Have you ever heard the kind of quote about, you know, the same man doesn't step in the same river twice, right?
Right.
Because the river's different and you're different. And I kind of want to use that analogy with movies. Like, you know, you are not the same person that you were when you first watched a movie and loved it. And for me, you know, movies that I loved when I was 14, I'm 45, right? So the movies that I loved when I was 14 and 13, some of them I still love, some of them I can't watch. Like just won't interest me, right? But for some of the classics, it's like I'm watching them, but I'm watching them not as a 14-year-old, but as a 45-year-old. And my
Right.
relationship and experience with them is completely, perspective is completely expanded. So I'm seeing and understanding things that just went over my head when I was
Yeah.
a kid. And you know, hopefully, when you know, if I get to my 70s, I'll be like, wow, I see all these characters and understand their nuances in a completely different way. And that's what's amazing about the relationship we have with, you know, pop culture, because it kind of, you know, it's like when you got a kid and you're kind of measuring them on the wall, their height. It's a bit like that. It's kind of a
Yeah.
measuring stick.
I think one thing that that speaks to it uh, really well is hopefully this will be in your '90s documentary, is the movie Popcorn, and how they show, you know, like in the '50s and '60s, going to the movies was an experience. You know, they're blasting in the scents, they're shocking your chair,
Yeah, yeah.
there's things flying across the screen, you know, the room and stuff like that. You know, it's again, it's not just a movie. You're having an experience, and that just doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. But
And you know what, Sean? You're right. That experience is everything. You know, going to the movies and seeing that film, and then going back to your point too, Robin, with the perspective when you're younger watching that film, and then you looking at it with a different lens as you're older, it's just either you end up seeing that same film and saying, "Why did I enjoy this that much?" or you end up seeing it and be like, "Wow, I missed this," and like you said, things that went over your head. But to again, with your point, Sean, like that experience, both of you guys are talking about that whole feeling. It's like going into the video stores, and I love that part of the documentary, part three, In Search of Darkness, that you talked about the video stores and how things were back in the '80s with the mom pop shops, and then Blockbuster, you know, corporate kind of coming in there and you know monopolizing everything. But it's just that feel. Um, I miss that feel going into the video stores.
I miss it as well,
oh,
and it's, you know, the in my forever home, I'll probably have a room which I will deck out as a VHS room
That's what I'm
with a
nice.
talking about.
massive sofa and a massive projector screen, and with shelves and shelves of VHS, right? And I've been, my new hobby is going onto eBay looking at TV, CRTV, and video combis,
Yeah,
which they have a lot of in Europe. Um, because I want to put one here somewhere. You know, especially as we start to get a little bit older, you want to reconnect with your teenage selves. So that's why, you know, if I look at the demographic of our backers, it's 35 and over. You know,
yeah,
probably between 35 and 50 years old. That's our key audience. It's not kind of teenagers now. Is it, and it, it's interesting. I've done a few podcasts recently, and it's just like everyone's around the same age. We're all, 30s, 40s, or whatever, and it's just like it's nice. It's there's a kind of connection there, pre-built, and I love that.
Off of experiences
Yeah,
that we've all been through, and living through different time periods, because we're in the time period now where everything is digital, everything's streaming, everything's easily accessible. Back to I think a point you made earlier on is that you had to make a decision. You know,
and commit. And
yes, you had to
commit.
commit to
It's
it.
the same thing with records, right? You save up your money, buy a record, right? And there'd be like 3 songs on the record that you really loved, and you weren't sure about some of the other songs, but you had to listen to them until you went, "Oh, I really like this other song now." Sometimes songs hit you at different times. And you're like, "Oh, I didn't hear it properly the
Yeah.
first time."
Hmm.
And that's, that was great about albums, and now no one does albums really. Like everyone's just getting, streaming songs and playlists and stuff. And I miss the commitment, and uh, I, one of my favorite 80s horror movies is The Stuff.
Oh, okay.
And
Absolutely.
and so, and so one of the things, I don't know if this is the same as you guys, but I have discovery stories about movies. So and there's 2 that come to mind. There's one, The Stuff. I remember I was working in a kitchen in a restaurant washing dishes, and I'd finished my shift. And I walked into my town center where I live now actually, and they had like a pop-up shop, and I walked in and it had all these like secondhand videos, and I just picked up The Stuff because of the artwork with the big tongue. um and I took it home thinking this is going to be terrible, and it was amazing. It was amazing, right?
The,
So we
the thing
fast forward.
about a, I'm sorry. The thing about a movie like that is it's just so, what would possess somebody to, in the beginning of the movie where you got the guy just scooping up this white crap that's coming out of the ground. What would possess somebody to just put that in their mouth and eat it? You know what I mean? It
I do,
just
I do, I
it's so
do.
absurd. It's so absurd, but it's so amazing.
So when we got an opportunity to interview Larry Cohen, which was I think his last filmed interview before he passed, I was so stoked. I'm a huge Larry Cohen fan, huge. I've read books on him, but I love that discovery story. The other one was going to a kind of charity shop and picking up a kind of big box VHS. This is when I was like maybe 13, of Day of the Dead,
Oh,
Mm.
right? And the European artwork for the VHS release actually wasn't very good, but it just looked weird. So I took it home and watched it, and it's like such a incredibly claustrophobic, horrific experience that I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" And I fast forward, and when we did the first In Search of Darkness, I did some interviews myself. I went out to America, and I went to Pittsburgh and spent some time with Laurie Cadil, who played Sarah in Day of the Dead. And I remember just thinking, this is crazy because I've got this relationship and discovery story of the film that you're in, that you're known for in the horror community, like in the horror kind of circuit. And it's kind of all come full circle, and this wasn't just any film. This was a film I used to watch on the regular, and I still watch it from time to time. Like I still, um, I, there's elements of that movie and the artwork that I'm drawn to. And that's kind of, we've all got stories like that. Jimmy, I'm looking at your amazing posters, and you have 2 of the greatest movies in the world, right, behind you. And Predator has horror elements. It's
yeah.
basically a slasher, right? We consider it sci-fi, but Predator is a perfect movie. It's a perfect. I went to see it at the cinema a couple of years ago again. It's perfect. I went to a Q&A with John McTiernan at the end of last year. He was
Oh,
talking
wow.
about it. It was just fat. But if I could watch Predator, um, in 10 years' time, and nothing will have dated about it. And the
100%.
pacing and everything there's just, but I remember the first time I watched it, like I remember where I was, who I was with, how old I was. That's what's amazing
That
about.
connection, that
Yeah.
story, that
Yeah.
you know why? My father, that was the first movie I watched with my pops, was Predator. Yeah,
Wow.
so it was Predator, and he was a horror guy too. So yeah, that connection with him, and
My
that was my
mum
youngest memory.
my mum is coming over on Saturday night, and we're going to watch Exorcist 3.
That sounds like
I'm
a good
doing like
time.
recent, and it's just like, like, so it's just, I love it. I don't really think of myself as like a horror person. Like I don't, one thing I've learned, right, about the horror community is people, maybe some, first impressions, maybe this is you, people self-identify with the horror genre. Like, what they wear, tattoos, like what they have on their walls, all of that kind of stuff. It's on their bodies,
There you go.
right? Look, no one can question your, no one can take away your horror card, Sean. Okay,
Right.
right? But and I'm not that, and I'm certainly not a horror expert. But one thing that I've learned, and one thing I'm so grateful for, is first of all, we respect the horror fans. They honestly know more than us, right? And the fact that we created something that's been embraced by hardcore horror fans because they know what it is and what it's not, that's been amazing as well. And I haven't, we did a sci-fi documentary and that was hugely successful, but that fan base is so different to the horror fan base.
Yeah.
And I think why horror will always be hot, but it's going through a kind of hockey stick popularity curve at the moment, is because horror fans will support anything. Like, have you guys seen Skinamarink?
You know what? That's on my list too recently. I have not got a chance to watch it yet. Yeah.
Very controversial film, right? And I watched it and I couldn't get through it, right? And I really wanted to not. I couldn't get through it because I was frightened. I couldn't understand why everyone was talking about it, but everyone has been talking about it, and it's an experimental film that came from nowhere that got a kind of, I wouldn't say global, but it got a transatlantic cinema release. This $15,000 experimental film is in cinemas.
Yeah, I know. It's
Like
wild, man.
what other genre does that? I think it's a huge success story. And because it was so polarizing, I had people on Twitter saying, this is the most frightening experience I've ever had watching a film in my life. So I went in going, right, okay, here we go, I'm prepared.
Let's go. What am I watching?
What am I watching, right? But I mean, that's my personal experience of it. And the way I approach movies is I want to understand the value. Like I want to get value out of it. And sometimes I don't, and that's okay. That's on me. But you can't deny something like Skinamarink the value that people see in it because it's blown up. And you can look at some of these slashes. You're talking about Madman. You're talking about you've got the mutilator behind you, right? Sean, but people love these films and they get so much from them.
Without question.
And then other people don't, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's like anything. It's subjective. Entertainment is subjective. And with horror, though, like you're right. The fans, hardcore fans, or even if you're not a hardcore fan, but you love horror, you're going to support, horror. Of course, there's going to be people, a lot of, back and forth opinions on certain movies or whatnot. But, the beauty of it is, let's call a spade here. Okay, Robin? The movie could be absolute garbage. Like, you could see it and like, this is not good. But you're going to have a cult following of people be like, this movie is the best movie I've seen in my life. And that's
But I
okay.
love that. But I love that.
Yeah.
Talking about like cult movies, this year I went to see, and it's not horror. You might kick me off the podcast, right? But I went to see one of my favorite movies of all time is Purple Rain, right?
Okay, that about wraps it up here, guy. No.
Yeah,
Purple Rain is amazing.
Yeah, Purple Rain's amazing, right? And I went to see it, and I have it on boot. Like I watch it. I've been to the cinema 3 or 4 times whenever they played it. But I watched it again, and I realized I was there for the vibe, and like every shot, even like the cutaways, even like suddenly became significant when I was watching it. And it goes back. I don't want to repeat myself, but like it's your relationship with a film is special because it's your relationship with it. And you revisit it and you see different things. And the only other movie that does that, to me, every time I watch it, I see something new, is Donnie Darko. And I was talking. I'm going on a YouTube channel in a few weeks to do a watch along of Repo Man,
Oh, okay, Repo Man,
Alex Cox.
84. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And like that, that's a film that occasionally calls me. Like I'll end up going on eBay trying to find like key rings with like just I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just like I have a yearning for it, and that's I don't know where I'm
Sure.
going with this, but like that's kind of the vibe, right? So yeah,
It's just something. It's you. Everybody's different. Everybody has their thing that they love and they enjoy. We have those movies that we can watch over and over, and they just never get old. It's
I want
like
to ask you a question, right? Horror 365, right, which is wicked title. Why did you start this? Because there's a real commitment and a time commitment to doing a podcast and keep it regular, and all of that kind of stuff. Why did you do this?
I love it. I'm passionate about this. Like, there's a couple things in my life that I thoroughly enjoy that I can see myself doing every day, and it won't feel like work. I'm a huge wrestling fan and horror fan, and I've always been. And for me, I've had wrestling events in the past where we had wrestlers come in. We had a contract with Buffalo Wild Wings in New York, and we had different experiences. I wanted to provide experiences for fans that's different than a convention. I want
Yeah,
you to be actually able to hang out with these people. And that's what I did with wrestlers. And now I started dabbling a little bit with horror personalities as well. But it started here with the show. And I came up with the name. I wanted to do just podcast just to talk about horror, and it's starting to grow, every week. And, right now on Facebook, we got about 13,000. It's organic
yeah,
follows. It's not,
yeah, yeah.
and it's
I
just,
can see why. Like, there's just something. I mean, the connection with wrestling. Obviously, we got Chris Jericho
yeah,
in
yeah.
Search of Darkness 2 and 3, and like he was friends with Corey Taylor and Darcy, the male girl, and I was like, Darcy, can you hook us up with Chris, because he's a great name. Like, we like to have kind of popular figures that are horror fans in our things to give like the fan perspective.
Yeah.
I never knew how incredible his knowledge was, and like what a dream. I had this mad day where we were filming the sci-fi documentary In Search of Tomorrow, and we flew Chris Jericho in. I can't remember where, maybe Florida. We flew him in from Florida to LA where we were shooting, and on the same day we were filming Peter Weller. So and they crossed over. So I remember being on a Zoom call just like this, but it was Chris Jericho and Peter Weller, and I'm like, I was in my kitchen just chatting to him. It was just such a surreal experience. But Chris Jericho knows his horror, and he's like the real deal.
Yeah, you could tell. And the guy is just like you said, he's extremely knowledgeable. I don't know. I never met Chris, but just hearing him talk and hearing his podcast,
Just my experience was him, his team, everything about them was classy and
yeah,
delivered, and I'd love to have him back for 90s.
that's a guy. Yeah, that's another guy I was thinking about, like trying to reach out to get him on the show because I'm a huge wrestling guy, but at the same time, horror, and he's like right there. He's in both, and that would be a nice interview, nice conversation with Chris. And he's a talker, man. Like listen to his podcast as well too. So he's really good at what he does, man. And you could tell it's just he's passionate all around. Back to the people. That's another question just popped in my mind now. Was there anybody that you wanted to have on that you weren't able to obtain?
Yeah. So the white whales, as I call them, these impossible missions that we have to hunt until we get them. The two, right? Okay, and they shared joint top position. Okay, Bruce Campbell
Oh,
just couldn't make it work,
I was thinking, yeah.
and Clive Barker, who we came
Mm.
so close
Oh.
to many times, just didn't happen. And you can't win them all. But I have a brilliant story
Oh, I'm ready to hear it.
about. Yeah, okay, so we worked so hard to get everyone. I had a chat with Barbara Crampton last weekend.
Oh,
She called me up about like another thing she's looking at, and I said to her, I remember when, because it was a crowd-funded documentary, and this is back in 2018. people were very skeptical about crowdfunding. And I remember having a chat with Barbara, and she was like, normally I don't do crowdfunded projects because, there's a chance they might not come out and blah, blah. And we were like, this is 100% happening. We're really committed to doing this. Barbara joined the casting, and it just opened up. Everyone else wanted to come on because Barbara came on, but we couldn't get and then the next sort of huge thing that happened at the end of production is we got John Carpenter. So it's like, this is official. We've got John Carpenter. But we couldn't get everyone. And then when we were in production for part 2, I got called up by Robert England's agent, right? And I'm sure you've had to deal with agents.
Oh boy!
This was the greatest call with an agent of my entire career. She rang up. She went, "Hey, right, Robert wants to be in Search of Darkness Part 2. Can you have him in it?" And I was like, let me think about that, right? And it was like, Robert, part 1 was a hit, and Robert likes hits. And it was the best conversation. I said, "This is the best conversation I've ever had with an agent." And and David, my director, went out to see him and was with him for 3 hours, and he was magnificent. He's very theatrical and super smart, right? And elevated in his thinking and the way he explains stuff. And that was a great. I remember I was out with a friend when I got the email, and I was like, I am so happy that he wants to do this. And with 90s, there's lots of big names that we want to get involved, but at least now we go in with a bit of a track record. But yeah, so that Clive Barker would have been great. And Bruce Campbell, when you see him in interviews, he's like charisma on legs. Like, he would have been amazing. We didn't really have anyone from Evil Dead who was really part of it. And I feel that although our segments on it were really good, and they were, the commentators who talked about it were very knowledgeable, I would have loved to have someone from the film that had been in that experience, because it's one of the greatest horror. You can't talk about 80s horror without talking about Evil Dead.
I agree.
But in a way, when you're covering a decade like the 80s, there'll never be another decade like it. It was just pure creativity. And you're spoiled. We could be talking for 5 hours on a podcast about 80s horror and miss out some big stuff. Because you go down all these rabbit holes.
It's littered, man. It's littered with 80s horror, man. Horror movies, I should say, in the 80s. And that's, I don't know, it was just a time period, like you said, it's originality at its peak, I feel like. And also, though, at the same time, it was because of that boom, and this is what I think we're seeing now, because of that boom in the 80s. Yeah, it's like everybody wants to get in now. It's like, I gotta make a sequel. Look at Psycho, came out in 1960, right? And then part 2 all the way in the 80s because of the horror boom. So everybody wanted to jump on board. And
have you seen?
I'm sorry. That's like I said earlier, Jimmy. When you have Friday the 13th was popularity, then you have a run of cookie cutters. And it's just an explosion. The same thing with music. You have your Motley Crues, your Poisons, your big bands, but then you have another 20 bands that are cookie cutter, on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles. The same thing with horror. Once Nightmare on Elm Street hit, now you got, a run of cookie cutter movies of the same kind of deal going on. So it's just
okay. So this is a question for both of you, right? I agree with you, Jimmy. I think we're seeing another golden age, right? And the barrier to entry is so low that anyone who's really committed can make it happen now, or at least have a go. What's come out in the last 5 years that you've got excited about from a horror movie fan perspective? I'm taking over the show now. I'm going to.
Robin, we're going to have to schedule something. You got to put me in the 90s now. I got to be in the dock now. This is it. We're talking. Go ahead.
If you wear that jacket, okay. So yeah.
Listen, let me tell you. Hold on, while you're here, I was debating between this or the silver one, Rob.
Well,
the silver one.
That's a hard one. That's a hard one. I'm impressed.
Geez, you got it. It's a done deal. Sean, what were you saying?
I'll answer the question, but for me, my problem with anything past the early 90s is CGI. I'm not a fan of CGI at all. And I think even the worst practical effects from the 80s are better, even when you know it's just ketchup on somebody's shirt, are better than anything CGI. But that's just my personal opinion.
I
But
agree with you. I agree with you. However, because it's been so long since the early CGI,
mhm.
right? It's in a way, it's kind of forgivable now. Like people, like
It's
it's
still rough
sort of
for me.
yeah, like it doesn't take me out of the film. I don't
I
hate it
agree.
as much as I did. There was a period, maybe like the early 2000s, where I'd watch early
It was
90s stuff,
horrible.
and it looks horrible. But now in 2023, like you can go, well, that's just olden days computer technology, you know?
But the one thing that I talk about to everybody is from A24 Studios is the movie X, and then the prequel Pearl.
I haven't
I
seen Pearl. I
I just
watched
can't.
X.
So I love them both, and I believe those are done with practical effects. I like the Pearl so much better, even though there's less killing and stuff. I just can't speak enough of those two movies, and I'm very excited for the sequel to X. It's going to be called Maxine. Um, those I you know, when people ask me for something new, what's the one with the there's one with a puppet. I think it's called Dead Silence, or what's that?
Yeah, I think it is Dead Silence. It's
Yeah,
like
it's like
almost like the
an
puppet from
older woman.
Goosebumps almost.
She's holding a puppet on the cover.
It's like the shirt. He's like,
Yes, yes.
yeah,
So,
Yeah, yeah, I've
so
seen the
when I was in
poster.
Salem last year, we went to Count Orlok's museum, which is absolutely amazing. And he had a statue of, you know, of that. And, you know, he was telling us, I've never seen it. And to this day, I haven't seen it. I actually just ordered a 4K Blu-ray of it, and I'm going to watch it for the first time. But the thing that sold me was he had told me, you know, that it's all practical effects. So that's a, you know, that's a go for me there. So I'm hoping that I like the film, but, you know, but you know, again, when people ask me, well, what are you watching that's new? I automatically go to X and Pearl. And if you
yeah,
haven't seen Pearl yet, I recommend it as soon as possible.
I enjoyed X. I enjoyed X. I haven't seen Pearl. Pearl is on my horror watch list.
It's there's more story to it, a lot more story, and you know, you get
She's amazing, that actor.
she's
She's
Mia Goth
British.
is
Yeah,
absolutely amazing,
yeah,
and
she's good.
you know, you get a very very in depth look at Pearl, and you know what made her become who she was and do the things she does. It's like I said, I'm very, very excited for. I think Maxine is in production right now, and that's going to take place in the '80s, which is another plus. So, you know,
X had that Texas Chainsaw 1974 vibe.
it had that vibe
It
to it.
did.
Yeah,
It did. It did, and that was deliberate. And you know what? I don't have a horror card, but I probably need to hand it in. I only watched the original Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time last year. I'd never seen it. It was a gap, and I had some friends over, and they said, "What do you want to watch?" I went, "Have you seen it?" I went, "No," and I loved it. I thought it was amazing, and I saw so many other films that had copied it, and
Oh yeah.
the vibe, the aesthetic, like in the air, is very reminiscent of that, and I'm sure that was
Mhm.
deliberate.
Oh,
Jimmy, what about you? What have you seen recently that is like in the last 5 years that you've gone, oh, that's really captured my attention?
so many horror films, like, and lately they just pumping them out. I've seen recently Smile. I thought was pretty
Oh,
unique. Yeah,
I watched it in the cinema. I was like this. I was like, oh my god, I
yeah,
can't. Like,
just the
so good.
facial expression. Barbarian was another one that was
I enjoyed that.
that
I
was that
enjoyed
was crazy.
Barbarian, but it's like it kind of ran out of steam at the end a little
Yeah,
bit.
no, it did. It did. I agree with that. And
But I enjoyed it. I really, and it Black Phone was amazing.
Black. Oh, thank you. Yes, Black Phone. Yeah, that was the other one. Again, original. I at least to my knowledge, it's original. And again, 70s vibe with that. Um, Terrifier too. I've seen
I
one. I
haven't
was
seen the Terrifiers.
I never was like behind the whole Terrifier movement at first. Another team member who's not wasn't able to jump on today. Horror Daddy, we call him. He dresses up as Art the Clown. All these different. He's a cosplayer, but he's so passionate and dedicated and detailed with his work, man. It's incredible. But he's a huge Terrifier fan, and he got me. I said, "Oh, you got to watch this." I said, "Oh, Terrifier." I said, "Oh, it was creepy." The first one was good. I said, "All right, see the second one." The kills, number one, were all practical. So they did a great job with that, and it was sick. Like the movie was sick. So it got me. the buzz that was going around, people passing out in the theaters or throwing
Yeah,
up.
that's the why I haven't seen it, because there's a whole bunch of horror movies like Martyrs and like there's a whole sort of, I'm not, what do they call it, torture porn,
Yeah,
right?
That's
Where
exactly
the
what I call
saws
Terrifier. Yeah.
where the saws got to, right? Where actually it was too, like, I don't, maybe when I was younger, like 14, I would have really dug it, but I find it, I don't, I'm, it's not, I'm frightened of getting frightened, but I don't enjoy it as much as I used to.
Can I give you a recommendation, Robin?
Yeah.
So before you watch Terrifier, I think the theatrical one was 2017 or Terrifier 2.
Yeah.
In 2011, he put out the first film called Terrifier. It's a 20-minute short, and it's my favorite out of all of them.
Wow. Have you seen
can just find it
Host?
streaming online. If you just type in, I think it's 2011, you just type in Terrifier 2011. There's a site somewhere that streams it, and to me, it's the absolute best one out of all of them. And not a lot of people know about it.
But that's a great story, Damien Leon, because he's an independent creator
No
that's
doubt.
created a hugely identifiable character, a whole universe and IP around it, come from nothing.
Yeah.
And you can't, this is what I'm saying, like, you can only do that in horror.
passion. That's what
It's
it
been
is.
a long time since there's been a character who stands out like Voorhees or Freddy
Yeah,
or Chucky, and Art the Clown does that.
I respect that. We do watch parties on our YouTube channel, and on every Sunday night, and on this Sunday, we've got Peter Jackson's Brain Dead. I think it was called Dead Alive.
Dead Alive, yeah.
US, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Peter Jackson's another one where, my favorite movie of his is actually Bad Taste, because
Is that the one with the guy with the big head?
Yeah. It's a great
Mm-hmm.
film, right? It's a great film with a great soundtrack, but it's what it represents. It says you can come from nowhere, and he literally, like, Wellington, New Zealand, that's the opposite of anywhere where the focal point of activity and entertainment, it's like the most opposite place. How can you go from there and do a film that took you 4 years to do, with, like, you've made everything yourself, you've made those alien heads in your oven, right? 4 years, and then be, behind one of the biggest entertainment franchises and become a billionaire. Like that that's what this genre can do. And it's amazing. I mean, the one of the things that really impressed me over the last couple of years was a film, and it was a Shudder original. It was called Host, and it was all set on a Zoom call.
Oh,
just like this.
See, that's creepy. Now, what's going to happen next? Somebody's going to pop out.
I've recently become friendly with a guy called Jed Shepard, who is the guy that wrote Host. And it's just, I said to my dad, who's like in his early 70s, I said, Dad, you've got to watch this. And, like, if you watch this and you're going to commit, you need to watch it on your laptop with your earphones. Right? Okay. And I said, look, here, here it is, like, go watch it. And he wrote back to me the next day saying, are you trying to kill me? Right. But like that, and it's only 60 minutes long, right? And it was just, I can't say enough good things about it. Like, I recently revisited it. The first time I watched it, it scared the hell out of me. I was like, that Paranormal Activity,
Blair Witch,
Insidious, all of those kind of films I love.
Did you see the Blair Witch Project?
Yeah, I did. Do you know what, right? So obviously we're going to talk about Blair Witch in the 90s. And but my personal experience, I was at university in Manchester in England, and I remember going to see it and being really excited about it and not enjoying it.
Oh, I mean, that's why I said horror subjective. It's I think for me, it's one of those films that it scared the hell out of me. I mean, the promotion for that was everything.
But that's what they talk about, and that was the first viral, like, and then everyone tried to copy that, and it's yeah, like, it's going to be so much. The 90s is going to be so much fun. I've actually bought Blair Witch Project on Blu-ray, and I need to watch it again because I haven't seen it since it came out, since I was at university.
Just to speak to the opposite side of the spectrum from you, Robin, you said you weren't really, excited about the Blair Witch. So I had seen it for the first time. I didn't see it in theaters, but I had it on VHS. And I'm a guy who likes the outdoors. And I had seen it before it was revealed that it wasn't real. And I watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre when I was 10 years old. I've been watching horror my whole life. And because it's in the woods and that's a reality for me, it scared the living shit out of me. Like, I'm not going to lie. There's a scene where they're in the after the one guy disappears and they hear him screaming in the night in the darkness. I was looking behind the couch, man, and I'm not even making that up. That scared the shit out of me. But because I like the outdoors and that was a very realistic, thing, then I got disappointed, when it
was revealed
that it wasn't real.
I love
But
it.
a lot of people look at that as like a start of found footage, but that all started in 1980 with Cannibal Holocaust, man. That it didn't start there. Cannibal Holocaust, I believe, is like the original.
I mean, it's a very controversial film because of the animal killings and stuff like that. And actually, when we covered it in part 2, Chris Jericho did a really good piece of commentary about it. But if you watch Cannibal Holocaust and if you can see past,
I love it.
Yeah, it's a very evocative film. So Host, if you haven't seen it, it's on Shudder.
Mm-hmm.
Please watch it, and extra points if you watch it on your laptop.
I'll give it a shot.
I'm doing laptop.
I'll give you accreditation on your horror card if you manage to do that. Okay,
let's go.
Okay.
The other thing about Cannibal Holocaust, I still genuinely believe that some of those natives might have actually been really killed in that film.
Man, but that was the whole pitch. It was a snuff movie.
It's so hard
right?
to not.
Yeah.
Like the girl that's on the beach where he's, hitting her with the rock and everything, man, that's not only hard to watch, but,
It's interesting, right? Because what you've touched on is the idea of the urban myth,
mm-hmm.
right? And so when I was growing up, I grew up through the video nasties era where everything was banned, right?
Right.
And I remember being about 16 and The Exorcist was banned. And I'd always heard about this movie. And so it was banned on video. And I found they were screening it somewhere. So me and my friend of mine, and we both worked at Pizza Hut at the time, after our shift, we drove up to watch The Exorcist, and it just absolutely blew my mind. But when it came around again, like in the 90s for their big cinema release, they did a big theatrical release and they added footage and stuff. It was still amazing because it's another perfect film, but it didn't have that mythos because it had been banned. The Evil Dead was banned in the UK. The first time I watched that, I remember there's a jump scare in The Evil Dead where I literally, I levitated off the couch.
Yeah, Rob, what you doing, man?
Yeah, and the other one, right? There's two other movies. I'm gonna shut up, right? There's two other movies. There's a made-for-TV movie which was British, which if you haven't seen it, it's the greatest jump scare ever in history, right? The Woman in Black.
The Woman in Black. Mark that
Please get on Google and order that movie. The Woman in Black is from like 1983 or 1986.
I'm trying to think if I've seen that one.
It has Daniel Radcliffe remade it in the 2000s, right? But the original was a TV movie, but it was feature length. That just blew my mind. And then the original, I remember I was in my 30s and I watched Paranormal Activity at home in my laptop in my apartment. And I think I was like 32 or something. 32-year-old young man had to sleep with the light on. Yeah, hearing all these noises.
Yeah, the nightlight, the SpongeBob nightlight and everything going. You got to put on a Disney movie after that to get the line. Oh man, no, listen, it's real. You watch horror movies at night. Some horror movies will do that to you. Like you just like, what did I just watch? Why did I
won't watch horror movies on my own. Right, I get too into it and I get uncomfortable. I'm like, I'm a bit of a scaredy cat. Like I won't. There's a lot because I get so into it. It really affects me. I get. I'm like this. I'm like, watching Smile at the cinema. I was like, reclining into my chair, trying to sort of, But that's what's amazing about it. Like I don't. Apart from maybe like really well done big effects pieces. There isn't another genre that.
Oh, it could be something simple. I mean, I remember watching Dark Knight of the Scarecrow when it came out on TV in the early 80s as a whatever, 12, 13, or whatever how old I was. And the part that I couldn't sleep was at the end when the Scarecrow turns his head. It scared the living shit out of me, and I 100% didn't sleep that night, but something that simple, and a made-for-TV movie where there wasn't any blood or anything like that going on, but just the thought of that, Scarecrow turning his head at the end of that movie like he did,
that's the perfect age, is 12 or 13.
No doubt.
That to imprint horror. Mm-hmm. It's like tribal scarring. It's like, I've got 2 young daughters, and I was having a chat with my wife, say, is 6 years old too young to watch Jaws? It probably is.
I don't want to go to the beach, Mom.
I'm never going. I won't go swimming. My wife's from Australia, right? So we go back we go back as much as we can, and but I never go swimming in the sea because they've actually got real sharks. So and Jaws did that to me. So yeah.
Oh
yeah, no joke, man. I'm not in the water. I go maybe just feet. That's it. I'm not going in. I'm not a water guy. The beach, I'll go. I'll sit in the sand for a little bit.
Yeah. I'm not a water guy.
I like watching the water. I like on a platform.
That movie, scarred me. So, guys, this has been really fun, and I want to thank you so much for inviting me on. It's a real honor and privilege. And when we get to do In Search of Darkness 90s, please reach out and we'll hook you up with David Weiner, who's far more knowledgeable and way more charismatic than me.
No, come on, man. You've been a blessing, man. I appreciate it, Robin.
But he would love this, and he can go really deep because obviously he directed everything. But thank you so much for inviting me on. I find that stuff, this is a really great podcast, and I find that I get a lot of energy and ideas from doing this kind of thing, and I appreciate it. I feel very honored.
Oh, dude, listen, Robin, you're more than welcome. Thank you for taking the time for us. But before we let you go, I got a little segment here, okay? It's called the 2-minute drill. So I'm going to ask you a whole bunch of random questions, and there's no right or wrong. It's just, you give me your best response. I'm going to set my timer here, but you got to do it within 2 minutes. We only have one person to complete it, but I think it was said himself in most of the answers. So, yeah. So here we go. You ready to rock and roll?
I'm there.
Okay, we're here. 3, 2, 1. Favorite horror icon?
Chocolate chip Charlie.
Favorite slasher?
Friday the 13th.
Weapon of choice?
Pass.
To remake or not to remake?
To remake. You never know, they get it right sometimes.
Dark alley in New York City. Who do you want to have your back?
Jason.
Best horror personality?
All right. This is the first one that comes to mind, and they're not talent. But it's a guy called Phil Nobile Jr., who is the editor of Fangoria. And whenever I listen to him speak about a film, I feel I could just listen to him talk about films all day because it's so interesting, his viewpoint. I don't know, probably a bit more of a kind of talent personality. Maybe Joe Bob Briggs. There's a kind of affinity that we all have to him, and he's like a center point for it all. So yeah, and he's in Search of Darkness.
Joe Bob, got it. 80s or 90s horror?
80s, all day.
All right. Universal monster of choice?
I'm going to go with Frankenstein.
What's your horror movie junk food?
So what do I eat when I'm...
Yeah, here, what's your junk food of choice? Yep.
Buffalo wings. Buffalo wings.
That's it.
Awesome.
we hit the time, but there's a lot more. I want to ask you just a couple more on this list here. Who's the ultimate scream queen in your opinion?
Oh, okay. So this is a controversial one. Okay, so I'm gonna say Barbara Crampton, right? But there's a trilogy: Caroline Williams, Kelly Maroney, right?
Love them.
Right, but when I first started speaking to Barbara when we were doing, I'm sure she won't mind me saying this. When I started doing In Search of Darkness, we did a little promo video called Scream Queens.
Okay.
And Barbara was like, I don't like to be thought of as a scream queen. And she sent me a link to an article she'd written in Fangoria, because she's a writer as well, about the term scream queens and not wanting to associate. I can't remember why, but to me, she represents, especially now, because she's having a massive resurgence in her career. A lot of the iconic scream queens are still, working now. Yeah. I would say that, and actually Linnea Quigley, who's in Search of Darkness,
Queen of 80s horror. She's the queen.
Yeah, and she's really comfortable. I tell you, who's actually very active on social media with us is Joretta from Demons, and Caroline Williams, who is still doing movies and obviously famous for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 and Stepfather 2 and stuff. So yeah,
that's a good list right there. Horror movie crush.
I definitely have one. Oh man! All right, you know who it is because I was really fascinated with the vulnerability, the combination. It's Heather Langenkamp, because you've got this duality going on of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
She's a teenager in this awful situation, but you've got this incredible inner strength. And actually, that reminds me of my wife, because my wife is, very feminine, but she's super strong inside. She's a very strong person, and it has that inner strength. And you can see Nancy, the character of Nancy in the progression through that film. So that's my horror crush, because it's not it's multi-dimensional. She's beautiful as well, right? So but there's more to it than that.
I think that's the perfect answer, and I'm taking some notes if anybody asks me that, because I got to throw the missus. Always get the missus over. All right, so Robin, I know we held you up a long time here, but last
My
question
pleasure.
for you, man. 10 years from now, where is Robin Block?
I want to, on a career level, I really want to take community-driven entertainment as far as I can, right? So there's, we've got projects in the gaming genre, in sci-fi, not just horror. And I want to see how far I can take it. I want to look at things like Lord of the Rings. I want to basically develop. I want my career to be about developing ways for fandom and groups of fans to better manifest their relationship with the work they love. So I think that In Search of Darkness, especially if you're a backer, especially if your name's in the credits, that Blu-ray, that physical item is a manifestation of your fandom. And that's what my career, I want it to be about. I feel like it's a vocation. And I want to go beyond what people think of as a documentary. I want to sort of create my own niche. In terms of life, I love being at home with my family. I love watching my girls grow up. And 10 years from now, I'd like to be doing what I'm doing now. How amazing being invited onto a podcast. Getting to people. You do something, people like it, and they tell you they like it. Best job in the world. I just want to see how far I can take it.
You're the best, Robin. We love you for what you created, man. And you can't take it back. It's there. It's solid. It's a gem. It's a gold bar for me as a horror fan.
And thank you so much.
Seriously.
look, I kind of kicked things off and I pulled the team together, but it's a collaborative effort, you know. And David would say this: we've got an amazing team at CreatorVC. Everyone I was working then with, I'm working now. We've been together for almost 5 years, and we've all grown. And we all point to In Search of Darkness as like the greatest gift. And the final thing I want to say is that what's amazing about crowdfunding and projects, and there's zero barrier to entry. You know, you've just got to make something that people want. I was not in the film industry or the TV. I just went off and started doing it. You know, and that's why I looked at people like Damien Leon and Peter Jackson that just didn't need permission. And you know, sometimes you get lucky. I got very lucky working with David Weiner. I got very lucky with everyone that worked on that first one. We had some, you know, Heather Wixon, Jessica Dwyer, like some really amazing people who are super well known in horror fandom. You know, you trusted me, gave me a shot, and we made something that I really think you know, made an impact. We've just been nominated for a Golden Chainsaw Award.
Let's go, baby! Golden Chainsaw.
We just got nominated for a Rondo for the series for best documentary. Like, you know,
awesome.
Yeah, like it was the soundtrack. You know, the new retro wave vinyl soundtracks, Weary Pines. Like, it's not. What I've learned about this is the whole thing is a collaboration. As a team effort, and you've got to be. You know, the intrinsic motivation is the kind of compass. It's like I would do this anyway. You know, you're not, obviously you want to do things that are going to be successful and commercially successful and that kind of stuff. But if you can work on something that has that, you're keyed into it on a spiritual level, that's the best thing in the world. And it's the first project really of my career, really, where it's been like, I'm all in, and it changed my life. It changed the life of my team. And, you know, I think that people will be discovering this series for a long time to come. And the last thing is this: it's a window, it's a mirror, it's a reflection of the fandom that it came from. That's all it is.
And it's incredibly done. And shout out to CreatorVC, the entire team, to you, Rob, to Dave. You guys have done an amazing job.
I will recommend this to Dave. Please get in touch when we start talking about 90s, because he would really love it, and I think you'd really enjoy meeting him. He'll have a whole different, because he did all the interviews. He'll have a whole, you know, amazing stories.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to have Dave on and talk with him. Yeah, definitely will do. And anything you need from us over here too, Robin, listen, let me know. Any way I can help, promotional videos.
You know what? Like, I'll hit you up, and Jimmy and Sean, thank you so much. You know, you are who we do this for. Like, you're the customer.
Thank you.
You know, like, it's kind of, if you know, that's it. And you see this commonality. Like, it's just like the bat signal. It's like you throw up the bat signal, everyone's like, right.
You had me sold at 80s, Robin. You had me sold at 80s. I'm there. What is it? What I gotta pay?
If you can tag the 80s, or just email it. If you start promoting, if you push it out on your socials, just tag at 80s horror doc, and we've got about 150,000 followers just on the horror across Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. We'll push this out. Hopefully, you know, people discover your show as well. So,
hey, listen, that teamwork makes the dream work. I always said that, Robin. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, man. And Horrorheads, thank you for tuning into this incredible episode, and thank you for celebrating horror not only in October, but 365. We're gonna see you next week.